what do we have for number 2?
Oh, so World War II. Due to its extensive, the breadth and the scope of the PSYOP effort during the Second World War. Not much needs to be said about the historical context. I think most people are pretty aware of the general background of that conflict. But almost as a contrast to the First World War, which came in very late in the game, was relatively small in scale, World War II was sort of the opposite. It didn't take off immediately, but it happened much earlier in the U.S. involvement. And it grew into a multi-agency, multi-theater, joint, combined, multimedia, you name it, massive effort across the board. So I'll start with a couple examples. So as I mentioned, it was multi-agency. So in just 6 months after Pearl Harbor, after the U.S. gets involved in the Second World War, the U.S. creates 2 organizations for the purpose of influence and information operations. One is the Office of War Information, OWI, which handles much of the domestic information programs as well as some of the overseas effort. And the other is the Office of Strategic Services, better known as the OSS. In particular, the organization within the OSS that was responsible for sort of the propaganda mission was the Morale Operations Branch, or MO. So MO was actually had the authorities to conduct black propaganda, which was you could falsely attribute messages in order to deceive the enemy into having a certain reaction that's favorable to your objectives. There's 2 programs that, there's many programs, but 2 to highlight. One is called Sauerkraut. Operation Sauerkraut was the idea of using former German prisoners who volunteered to go behind enemy lines carrying morale operations products and sow dissension and distrust behind enemy lines in northern Italy. The other one was Operation Flakes, which is where morale operations, they would fill German mail bags with containing personal mail, but also morale operations products. They would drop U.S. and Allied aerial platforms would drop these bags along with on other air missions near, usually on attacks on railways, with the hopes that when these bags hit the ground and collapsed, the Germans who found them, who recovered them, would put them in the mail system. So between these 2 efforts and others, an estimated 10,000 enemies surrendered in northern Italy, around 10,000 soldiers.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, on the Army side of things, the Army took a little bit to get going. There were several staff agencies, again, at the theater level, Army group level, Army level, and so on. One of the most well-known is the Cyborg Division on the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, abbreviated to PWD SHAEF. That was the one that was under Eisenhower's command that led the strategic effort in Western Europe. The Army also established for the first time organic units, TO&E units, for the purpose of frontline propaganda. These were known as Mobile Radio Broadcasting Companies, or MRBCs. So there was 5 of those established: the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. The first operated in the Mediterranean theater of operations, the rest of them in Western Europe. So just as an example, there's a couple examples of MRBC operations I think would kind of highlight what they brought to the fight. So they did not operate as singular companies that went out there and did things as an entire unit. They would break up, they would task organize. Sometimes the MRCs would mix and match personnel. They would work with other agencies and so on, and they would form sort of PSYWAR task forces. So one example of this would be called Monarch. It was a task force called Monarch under 8th Corps. And what this organization did is during the Brittany campaign between August and October of 1944, they provided tactical loudspeaker and leaflet support to combat arms elements. In one instance, the Corps commander, General Middleton, Troy Middleton, sent a surrender appeal to surrounded, this was near the port city of Brest in northwestern France. He sent a surrender appeal to say, look, you guys are tough, you're battle hardened, you're a tough adversary, but you're surrounded. There's no other outcome to this. And the German general Ramke refused to surrender. And so what they did with that is they published what's called Ramke's reply, his refusal to surrender. They put it in a leaflet, dropped it on the German forces all throughout the area of Brest. And they ended up surrendering en masse, and it ended up being a successful campaign.
Wow.
Yeah, during the same campaign, they established what's called Radio Lorient in August of 1944. A junior enlisted soldier from the 3rd Mobile Radio Broadcasting Company who spoke German. He pretended to be an American officer of German descent named Captain Angers. Captain Angers had a whole backstory. His father had been killed in World War I. His family emigrated to the U.S. in 1928. He became a professor of German literature. Ended up somewhere along the line getting a commission in the U.S. Army. Now he's back to urge his fellow Germans to give up the fight. And the Captain Angers program was credited with bringing in somewhere between 12 and 1,800 soldiers between August and October of 1944. And these are just a couple of isolated examples of what these mobile radio broadcasting companies.
So just to be clear, then, so this guy, this Captain Angers, even though not his real name, but like, so he would actually just be then riding around on like these trucks that are just kind of skirting around the perimeter of these units, or how did that sort of
I think it was from my understanding, that was a stationary transmitter at Radio Lorient in the area, vicinity of Lorient during the Brittany campaign. Those operations went on to, they relocated the personnel in those operations to Luxembourg. So they helped fill out Radio Luxembourg for much of the remainder of the war. But they did have mobile radio capabilities, and also stationary. They utilized stationary facilities as well. So these are just a couple very couple examples of what the MRBCs brought to the fight. And I would be remiss if I did not at least mention Operation Fortitude, which was the massive Allied deception campaign. A lot of people, there's been a lot written about it, which was to deceive the Germans into thinking that the main attack was not going to be at Normandy, but at Pas de Calais.
Right.
Which involved keeping essentially a fake army on the books through October of 44. And they built this literally a fake army in southeastern of the UK to include inflatable landing craft. Fake landing craft, inflatable tanks, and so on. With fake insignia to try to deceive the enemy aerial observers into thinking that this massive army was building up there. So
I think a lot of the people that I think sometimes they think of maybe PSYOP or whatnot, but they sort of they remember, they've seen at least the imagery of the inflatable tanks. Was mincemeat a part of that at all? Fortitude?
Mincemeat was mincemeat was I believe that was the for Italy. The attack.
Oh, you're right. That's right.
For Sicily.
I haven't seen the Netflix yet, but I've had people talking to me and asking, little things about it. And so,
but mincemeat actually, I think, had its inspiration from the haversack ruse mentioned earlier from the First World War. So some of the people who had taken some of the lessons from that employed that for mincemeat.
Yeah, they're definitely, the similarities are a little bit, I think, too coincidental. So, yeah, that's probably true. Awesome.